Hello and welcome to our webinar, Author and Educator Roundtable, Culturally Responsive Books in the Classroom. I'm Maggie Reagan, Senior Editor, Books for Youth at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few technical details. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. A link to today's slides was included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. You can also download these materials at any time by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. Our conversation today will be moderated by Julia Torres. Julia is a veteran language arts teacher librarian in Denver, Colorado. She facilitates teacher development workshops rooted in the areas of anti-racist education, equity and access, and literacy and librarianship, and education as a practice of liberation. Julia works with students and teachers locally and around the country with the goal of empowering them to use literacy to fuel resistance and positive social transformation. Julia also serves on several local and national boards and committees promoting educational equity and progressivism. She is the current NCTE Secondary Representative at Large, a Book Love Foundation board member, and Educator Collaborative Book Ambassador. Take it away, Julia.
Hello, everybody. Hopefully you'll be able to see my video. I'm not sure if you can, but I'm excited today to be talking with 4 authors who wrote some books that really, if you wanted to, could be used on their own as just this amazing, culturally responsive addition to any curriculum, but also books that we want to empower readers that are own voices, texts, and then also books that are written by folks who are practitioners. They are teachers just like us. So first, I'm going to introduce you to each one of the authors, and then we will go ahead and get going. Candice Iloh is a first-generation Nigerian-American writer, teaching artist, and youth educator. She has performed her work around the country. She is a graduate of Howard University and holds an MFA in writing from Lesley University. Her work has earned fellowships from Lambda Literary and VONA, I hope I pronounced that correctly, among many others. This is her first novel. Tori Maldonado, the author of the critically acclaimed Tight and Secret Saturdays, is a teacher in Brooklyn, New York, where he was born and raised. His books reflect his students and his experiences. Jessica Kim writes about Asian American girls finding their way in the world. Before she was an author, Jessica studied education at UC Berkeley and spent 10 years teaching 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades in public schools. Like Yumi, Jessica lives with her family in Southern California and can't get enough hot Cheetos, stand-up comedy, BTS, and Korean barbecue. Simran Jeet Singh loves sports and signed up for his first marathon after being inspired by Fauja Singh. And like Fauja, he hasn't stopped running since. Simran is an activist, writer, and scholar who believes deeply in the divine goodness of all people. He is a spiritual religious life advisor at NYU and Columbia University and a visiting professor at Union Seminary. This fall, Simran is teaching a program at Columbia University and Trinity University on antiracism as a spiritual practice. He was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, and now lives in New York City with his wife and 2 daughters. So please welcome all of our authors. We can hear the applause. The applause is loud. Can you hear it? That's what's happening.
Woo!
The crowd is going wild. Very excited. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. I'm honored to be able to speak with a lot of authors. And I can tell you honestly that in reading each of your books, I read Tori's first because I did some work with a educator guide for Tori's. And then I read Candice's. and then Jessica's, and then Simran's. But I can say that, you know, I saw a lot of commonalities, but then beautiful differences, not only in structure, because they're obviously written for different age groups, but then, you know, voice and content and form. So I want to talk about all of that today at some point down the road. But first, I want to just jump right into talking a little bit about what you've perceived the importance of these books to be for folks who are in the classroom, librarians who visit classrooms, or language arts educators or literacy educators that are teaching literacy. So we can start with Simran.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being here. I'll start with my thesis, which I have sort of developed over my own lifetime of dealing with racist encounters and racism that's been directed at me. And in trying to figure out how to navigate that, my working thesis has become that if we can teach our kids to see the humanity in those who seem most different from them, then they can learn to see the humanity in everyone they encounter. And so that to me has been sort of the working model of the arc of my professional career now, and why I do what I do, how I do what I do. And the story of Fauja Singh really struck me. You know, it came from this desire to have representation around my own community, right? Like growing up in Texas, nobody looked like me. There were no books, there were no movies. And so there's this like yearning as a child to see yourself. And you all know that part of the story. I think the flip side of it is, what does it mean to live in a world and to raise our kids in a world where they're constantly being bombarded with negative messages about people who look like me? And what does it take to help them see their humanity? And so that's sort of where the idea for the book came. And the more that I sort of started envisioning it, the more my work in the racial justice work came to inform the real lens. Like the real lens was not about representation and about my own community. It was really about intersectionality. And I'm sure that term will come up a lot today. But for Fauja Singh, I share the sort of racial and religious identity with him, but there's so many life experiences he has that I never had myself. You know, he deals with ableism. He was disabled as a child. He deals with ageism, classism. He was an immigrant. Like all these aspects of his identity that I was able to access and challenge my own assumptions. And that's what I think books like these, we really want them to do, to sort of get out and excavate some of that toxicity that has come in through their socialization and provide them new ways of looking, new images and imaginations of who heroes can be. And I think that's what our books are, at least I'll speak for myself, that's what I'm trying to do with this book.
Myself, I do that all the time. I need to unmute myself regularly. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And one of the things that I love the most about the book is that there are certain pages where the artwork really stands alone to capture that emotional intensity or the emotional weight of what he was experiencing, but then also as he interacted with his world. And another one of my favorite parts of this book is when he's in London and you see in the background all of these people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds that are in the park. So it's kind of like a non-verbal way of communicating that, you know, we have no xenophobia here. We need to understand that, you know, every country in the world has folks who have migrated from different diasporas to be there, or who are a part of the diaspora. So anyway, I really appreciate the art as well as the story, because I think that a lot of times when primary educators are teaching with these books, they will direct students to focus just on the artwork and to analyze what's going on in the foreground and background and what are the emotional messages being carried just by the pictures. And then they'll look at the story separately and then they'll look at them both together. So really powerful piece that you have here. Tori, I see your book as an awesome segue in between our youngest students and before they get to middle grade. So would you talk to us a little bit about What Lane?
Yes. You know, I want to start with Tupac. Tupac has this line, you know, learn to see me as a brother instead of two distant strangers. And What Lane is really an attempt to do what Simran was saying, let people see the humanity in young Black boys and also brown boys and Black, brown kids and non-white children, but also help white children ally up. Because I think that if the law enforcement agent who killed George Floyd, I think if, it saw George Floyd as a brother, instead of the way he saw him, we would have had a radically different outcome. And it would be the same for all of these other cases. Breonna Taylor, the list goes on, we named them. I have to say, the reason that I wrote What Lane is because, when I was a middle school student, at the age of Stephen, 6th grade, my eyes opened up to racism. And I found myself moving from the younger years where I thought anybody could be in any lane, just like Stephen thinks anybody can be in any lane. Mm-hmm. And I was just like Stephen, like most boys, into Spider-Man and comics, into superheroes, fantasy, sci-fi. My eyes weren't open to what the upper grades were dealing with, to what adults were dealing with, what adults might call tough topics. And it was a tough topic for me to try to manage. As a boy, I knew I wanted to do something about it, but as a twiggy, afroed kid, I didn't have the tools to deal with what adults couldn't deal with for centuries. Mm-hmm. So it took me a lifetime to write What Lane, and I'm so happy that I got it out because I'm hearing that, I virtually visit with lots of different groups, and the reaction is, this is needed. This is a conversation that young people have been trying to have with each other and with adults for a while. So I'm so happy.
I love it. And I think that one of the things that's great is that it is written in a way that it's very accessible for some of our students who are still in the upper grades of elementary school even. So if they're in 5th or 6th grade, maybe even 4th, they can read it and they can start to talk about and think about some of the concepts in there. So I think the voice is a really powerful component of the book. And then I also just really enjoy that he has a bracelet, that he wears. And that's like a physical reminder, of what he's considering and always going back and forth with all day. So, I think if I could get some of those for the kids on my campus, that would be great.
I have to give a shout out to someone and someone that a lot of people know. She might be tuning in right now, Rochelle Menendez from Texas. She's a super librarian. She made this for me.
That's beautiful.
So there aren't a bunch of them. This is just like a one of a kind that I wish that I could duplicate and share with the world.
That makes it even more special. I am all about the book swag, by the way. So if you have like little mementos that go along with the books, I know Tiff Jackson has those grown hoop earrings. I have some. So yeah, I'm definitely all about, promoting the books, just the books, but then also the swag that accompanies it as well. So let's talk a little bit, Jessica, about Stand Up Yumi Chung, because I think this one's really powerful for our middle grade students who are just stepping into finding themselves.
Sure. Yeah. So I really wanted to write about what it means to be a second generation American. So like the main character, Yumi, I was born in the United States, and my parents were immigrants from Korea who came over in the 70s. And so it's a story about Yumi. It's about stand-up comedy, and it's about this, fun story about her stealing someone's identity. But really, it's about her kind of coming to love herself, both sides of herself. And so the very first scene, she's sitting in a Korean beauty salon. She's getting this hairstyle that she doesn't want to get, and she's so annoyed at her mom. And she's like, "Oh, I just wish my mom could be like all the other moms." But really, what she's thinking is, I wish my mom could be like all the other white moms, all the other American moms she sees on TV. And part of her has kind of, she's unaware of it, but she's kind of adopted the dominant society's view of her parents and of immigrants. And she's really downplaying the things that make her, because she's in middle school and she really wants to just fit in.
I think Jessica's breaking up.
Jessica paused. While we're waiting for her to come back, I will share that that scene in the hair salon at the very beginning of the book it just took me back to being 11 and 12 and being at the hair salon with my mom, because that was so it was a universal experience, but then I get the Korean American version of the experience, which was interesting.
Oh, I think I'm back.
Yay, you're back. Okay, perfect.
I was talking to myself for a really long time, so I don't even know where I left off.
I think you were talking about her wanting her mom to be like the other white moms.
The other white moms. And so I think Yumi is kind of downplaying the things that make her different. And she's wishing she could be like everybody else. And I think the book kind of takes her on this journey where she kind of comes to see where she comes from, what her parents bring, their values, their viewpoints, and their lived experiences as minorities in this country, and how they inform some of the reasons why they maybe don't go with the flow the way the parents do. And so yeah, this book is a lot about identity. It's a lot about acceptance and kind of unlearning the things that your society is telling you about yourself. And yeah, so that's
perfect. That's a perfect segue into Candace's book and talking a little bit about the importance for our students of everybody looking. There's so much that I love about Ada, so much. I love the dancing piece as well, because I don't read that very often, where folks talk about dance as not only a form of like self-expression, but healing and, you know, resistance. It's so many things. So Candace, could you share a little bit with us about the importance for you of everybody looking?
So yeah, my book, Everybody Looking, is, it's a story that I wrote for that space of transition from high school to college, and all the possibility of like what could happen when you leave your family and you leave everything that you've ever known, everything that you've ever been taught, and also these childhood memories that you don't even know are there yet until you get away from home. And so it follows the story of Ada, who is first generation Nigerian American. And it starts out with her just like leaving high school and all of these thoughts about what it's gonna be like to leave home. And it's about thinking that you are gonna go out into the world and change the world, and realizing the world is going to have a much more significant impact on who you are. And the world is going to give you permission to be who you really are when your parents aren't there. And the world's going to expose you to these different ways of being, and the world is going to trigger you and remind you of things that you thought either are just like, you know, way past and you're never going to deal with it again, or you don't even remember that it happened because of how your body responded to the trauma. And the dance aspect is just kind of like, you know, what we all do when we are growing up or healing from something. We find something that helps us like get to that place. And because she experiences trauma at a very young age in her body, dance is like, it's just like the most natural way for her to reclaim ownership of that, and to say like, you know, these things happen to my body, but when I do this thing, I feel amazing. Like I feel like I make sense. I feel like I do have control over something. I can be powerful, and I can create something that's beautiful, even though the world has been, you know, telling me that, you know, I have to change myself in order to be accepted, or in order to be seen as attractive or worth time or valuable. So I mean, I wrote it really, I wrote it as a way for young people to reflect on themselves, rather than me centering what other people have done, but more so centering the person who has experienced all of this messaging and this trauma. And this story is a way for her to really reflect on like what she thinks doesn't make any sense, and what she would rather be in this world.
I love that. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I know you've probably heard that a lot of times, but all of the books kind of hit me in the heart space a little bit because I know students who match the demographics that they, you know, might be specifically directed toward. But then I also know students who are, you know, white students who need to be decentered and who need to be reading stories of folks who have historically been marginalized. I have to call myself out because I did a classic moderator, you know, boo-boo, and I got your names correct, but I did not get your protagonist names correct. So Simran, can you please tell me how to pronounce your protagonist's name correctly so that the viewers can get that too?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's Fauja, that's Fauja Singh.
Fauja Singh.
Yep,
okay, great, thank you. And Candice, it's Ada, not Ada, right?
So it's technically pretty impossible for any American to say it properly. It's Ada. And if you have the Igbo accent, you'll say it more naturally. I don't even say it all the way right, but.
It's closer if I say Ada.
Yes.
Okay.
So there's more emphasis on the second part of the word.
Cool. Okay. I think that's an important distinction for our viewers to try anyway, to get right when we're talking about and reading these books with students. So I'd like to segue a little bit into talking about the creativity process, and then if you could, how you navigate being teachers and writers for young people. And I know that that's kind of a big, broad question, so feel free to talk about any part of that you feel is relevant, but I think that some of our viewers might find it really interesting just to hear about your journey to becoming authors for young people, and then what role does that play in the teaching work that you're doing now? Or are they, you know, they can't really, I don't think, be completely separate things, but feel free to talk about that, how you would like to, and anybody who wants to could start. Okay, Candace.
So I was in the classroom full time for 10 years, and 3 of those years I was a full-time classroom teacher. And then the last 7 years was as a teaching artist who worked throughout the public school system in New York City and DC. And teaching is what led me to writing YA. I was a poet starting I started to dabble in poetry at the age of 19. And then I started to, when I was in college, I started to learn more information about the achievement gap, educational disparity. And by the time it was time to graduate, I went into education just kind of like after volunteering and finding out more and more about how kids that look like me weren't getting the resources and the education that they needed. And so what ended up happening is that all of that time in the earlier years out of college, teaching so much, I started to mix my lives. And so it became really difficult for me to write things that didn't include the narrative of young people that were around me. And as a teaching artist, I oftentimes got a lot of my material from just spending time with my young people. And so being a teaching artist, you have the freedom of being able to kind of reshape your class into a space that you're talking about hard topics. You're doing lots of free writing as a creative writing teacher, and you're doing a lot of stuff where kids get to let their guard down. And that allowed me to hear how teens speak to each other when they feel safe and when they're not worried about what the adults are thinking around them. And so that really, it really just made the experience of writing YA come very natural to me. I learned about young people a lot in my 10 years of teaching, and it allowed me to portray them in a way that they approve of, because I used to slip parts of my book to them without them knowing that it was me. If kids were done with what the assignment was, I might just slip them something and be like, I think you might be interested in this because you said da-da-da in class. And I would make sure my name wasn't on it. And I wouldn't tell them the title. I wouldn't tell them why I'm giving it to them. And they gave me a lot of great feedback, and it just like, I just feel like there's nothing more exciting than writing for young people. And I ended up leaving the classroom last year, at the end of last school year, because what happened was I started to realize, in order for me to give my book the time that it needed and my writing the attention that it needed, it was time for me to not be teaching at the same time. And so for a while it fueled my work. And then after a while I had to leave in order to make something that I felt was going to be good enough for them. Like, I couldn't teach and write at the same time in the way that I wanted to.
Have you seen the 40-year-old version?
Not yet.
Okay, so
Not
she's
yet.
a teacher and she
Okay.
also is a creator. So when you get the chance to watch that, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because what you were describing in terms of sharing that writerly part of yourself with your students is something that's definitely explored in that movie, and it's powerful.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out.
You will love it. I think you will love it. I don't even know you, but I think you will love it.
Okay. Okay.
Jessica.
Yeah, so I was a teacher like Candice for 10 years also, in the lower middle grade, so 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. And it's just funny, like you spend so much time with a certain age group, and then your brain just kind of thinks that way. And so when I set out to write a book, I really wanted to touch on those themes of identity and what happens when two parts of your culture collide, and how to find your voice and where do you stand in the middle of your hyphenated identity. It was natural to just write for young people, for middle grade. I know the way they think, I know the issues that they have. And what's great about 8 to 12-year-old readers is they're really exploring identity at that age. They're so safe in their families and they know where they are when they're children. But right around middle school, you go to this big school, especially if you go to a big public school like the ones I used to teach in, and you're finding out where you fit in greater society, and you start questioning things that were normal to you your whole life, and now you're trying to fit in, and there's so many pressures. And I thought that was the perfect group to share this story with. And also what I love about middle grade readers is that they know how to feel. You know, if you've ever been 13 and you're going through so much change, your friends are changing, your body's changing, everything's changing, you're changing classes every hour. It's like it gives you this amplitude, and they can go on that journey with you, and they will go high, and they will understand the lows, and the drama is always real. And so it was the perfect group for my story, and I think that was informed by all my years in the classroom, and you know, all the drama I witnessed there from the sidelines. And so I haven't been a classroom teacher in some time now. It's been about 10 years, but I've still been active, you know, volunteering, and now my own children are middle grade readers, and so it's just a group that I'm always somehow around. And yeah, the classroom has been a huge part of informing, you know, just the issues that kids are going through. They're so different from some of the issues that I grew up with in middle school with social media, and like, it's just a different landscape. And so it definitely helps me stay grounded in like that world.
And it's constantly changing, right? Like TikTok is something that they didn't have a few years ago, and just seeing how big it is now. And I have a middle schooler. He's in 7th grade, and then I have my daughter walked behind me. She's a junior. And so just experiencing school from them, my son has now caught up to the age of students that I have in my library or coming through my library. So it's strange. It's strange, but also so interesting to just, you know, see that evolution of the human being from little kid to young adult. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, there's so much pressure now, different pressures with the rise of the social medias and even the way school is. So
yeah, and different tools too. There's something called photo math that I didn't know about that would have made my life so much easier. Photo math would have had me a rock star in math class, and I was not. I cried regularly in that math class. It was miserable. Tori, can you talk to us a little bit about your teacher life and writing life and how they intersect?
Yeah, you know, you use the word evolution, Julia, and I have to talk about how my writing evolved from my mom. My mom, I call my mom my Puerto Rican Yoda. And the reason I call her Puerto Rican Yoda is because she's short, like Yoda. She's like up to my chest. But she always spoke in riddles, like these Yoda quotes when we would go through the hood. And she never told me those weren't her quotes. One time we walked through and we saw some people fighting. And so she went over and she helped break up the fight. And I said, Ma, why'd you get involved? And she said, well, you got to be a rainbow in somebody's cloud. It blew my mind. I thought she was so deep. So I go to school and I tell the teacher, I was like, yo, my mom came up with this quote. The teacher said, you got to go back and tell your mom, Maya Angelou came up with that quote. So my mom was always hitting me off with quotes, right? Also, she got the village around us in the housing projects in Red Hook, Brooklyn, to help raise me and help. They played a Jedi mind trick on me. They made me think I was a creative, even though I may not have been a creative. She had dudes in the bodega. She had ladies on the stoops, people on the benches. They would all say, hey, yo, here comes little man. I heard you're a writer. You gonna write me something? And we all know what happens. If you take a sponge and you dip a sponge in dirty water, it turns dirty, right? If you take a sponge, you dip it in pure water, it will retain its color. So she was dipping me in the sponge of self-fulfilling prophecy. He's gonna be a writer. She's telling people since I was in diapers, I was gonna be a writer. So since it took a village to raise me, it's my village that inspires my creativity. My story really begins in 1988. Life magazine came in and did a 9-page photo spread on my housing projects. They called it the crack capital of the United States, one of the 10 worst neighborhoods in the country. When I saw that magazine, little me was so tight. I was so pissed. And my mom, she's like our relatives, where they could read our faces and know how we feel. My mom was like, yo, what's wrong with you? And I said, well, look what they did to our neighborhood. Because 100% of the people I knew who they made look like the Wire setting or Grand Theft Auto setting, they weren't like that. It wasn't my community. These weren't the people who knew me and helped raise me. So my mom, being Yoda, she told me, let me ask you a question. Isn't the pen mightier than the sword? And I'm like, what are you talking about? The pen is mightier than the sword. And then she goes, what you want to do? I said, I want to grab a baseball bat and find the people who did this photo spread. And she said, boy, this baseball bat is bigger than you. You pick it up and it'll fall on you and knock you out. She said, if you can't beat them, join them. And I'm like, Mommy, why are you speaking in riddles? You know what I'm saying? You're talking about the pen mightier than the sword. If I can't beat them, join them. What are you talking about? But it took a while for me to get what she meant. She was saying, if I didn't like the narrative that was being said about us, then I had to pick up the pen and like the Hamilton song, I wrote my way out. I had to rewrite, us into the canon. I have to say, I wish that I did what Candice did. Candice said she was sliding, her work to the young people to see if it was good. What I did was I did the flip of it. I wrote this book because I walked by an ELA teacher's class and she was mad. She had to read a book that she was assigned. And she said, T, come here for a second. Does this book sound like any of us? And I said, no. I said, can I read it to your class real quick? I'll freestyle and I'll just read it. She said, go ahead. So I read it. And when I read it, when I stopped, the kids were like, you need to write a book. And she said, you need to write a book. And that kind of worked on my mind. But at the same time, I didn't know I was a writer because I didn't go to writing school. I was like, and something had clicked, and it was a conversation with my Puerto Rican Yoda mom. My mom had said, at the heart of writing is storytelling. And you know how to tell a story? Hip hop, the comics. Write something that's like a comic book. Write something that's like hip hop. And so, my first book was Secret Saturdays, and like 40% of it is in freestyle hip hop verse because of that. And it also has this kaleidoscopic comic feel to it. So I just have to say that, my creativity is inspired by the kids, and also teaching. At the heart of teaching is also good storytelling.
You are some good storytellers. I mean, on paper, but then also just right now in this moment. I'm here and I could just have this conversation. I wish we could be in a room together because I think that, we all miss that, just being able to feel each other's energy when we're actually in the same physical space. Yeah. But I get a sense for who you are and just being able to hear you tell the stories of your environments and how that's shaped you and the people in your life and how that's shaped you. I'm in Candace's classroom. I'm with Jessica's kids. I'm there with Tori's mom. You know, I think that's something that people who are listening, we have to remember always, yes, there's your teacher identity, but we are people too. And so being human and bringing that humanity into whatever we do on the page is key to being able to do it in an authentic way. Simran, take it home.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll pick up from where Tori was. This isn't what I was, where I thought I'd go, but I love your point, Tori, of storytelling. And
Thanks.
to me, it's like there's something around the work of justice that really hits hard when it's told through story. And I'll say it a different way, that again, like I've learned this through my own life experience, that you can't really lecture your way into dignity. You can't use facts to convince people to treat you like a human being, right? It's really when they're able to see your humanity and of those around you. And that's what storytelling allows us to do. It helps us connect. And I think as teachers, we learn that on the fly, right? Nobody tells us that what we're doing in our classrooms is storytelling, but that's good pedagogy. That's what we learn to do when we're standing up in front of them and just like getting them engaged. Like, why do they care? They're only going to care if they feel connected to the material. And I think I didn't really even know that this was a common experience for other folks, especially people of color, until I was reading Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist this past year. And he talks about how the curriculum didn't reflect him. And so he had a hard time connecting and caring with the material. And I was like, oh, I didn't know other people had that same experience. Like I wasn't a terrible student, but I was completely uninvested. Like I didn't care about school growing up, and I did fine. And luckily I ended up finding in college, actually, when I got to choose what I studied, I was able to connect. And so I think that part of what you all do is there. It's just a matter of realizing that it's there. And so I'll say something else that Tori mentioned, maybe implicitly, but it definitely hits inside for me, and that's the imposter syndrome piece. Like, nobody told me that I would ever be a writer. I went to college, I went to grad school, I got my PhD, I've written way too much in my life, but like nobody taught me how to write. Nobody told me I knew how to write. I've always felt like an imposter. I still do. And so that part of it is real. And so if you're interested in writing, I mean, you know how to do it, and no one's any better inherently than you are. So I think that's part of the experience. That there's one other thing I want to say about my own teaching that's really informed my writing, and that is my training is as a historian, and I, in terms of what I care about, it's always the marginalized group, whose voices are left out, who are the subaltern, who are we not hearing from, and so I teach right now. I'm teaching a course on Buddhist history. I teach Islamic studies. I teach Hinduism. I teach my own tradition, Sikhism. In my racial justice work, it's all about these groups that are left out. And I think that's a common thread I'm hearing from all of the speakers today, that like when you are invested in these communities and you know them, then you can write with authenticity. And I think that's what makes these stories hit. When you really feel them, the emotion comes out. I mean, I don't know if this is the same for everyone else, and I'd love to be in the same room so I could hear your experience in writing. But like, this story it's not my story. It's a biography of somebody else. But like every time I open it up, I'm like, I feel it viscerally because it's my own story in some way too. So I think that's part of the process for me.
Well, talking about that imposter syndrome, I don't write fiction or nonfiction for young people, but I do a lot of writing for teachers. And I think that it's in the world of academia, there's this hierarchical structure, and then there's also that disconnect between practice and theory. And so I always have imposter syndrome, wondering, why is anyone going to want to listen to or read what I have to say? I'm not at the top of this academic hierarchy. I'm a librarian. I have 16 years experience in the classroom, but like, that's what I got. I do have a master's in education, but like some of that stuff that I learned, to be honest, to get that piece of paper is definitely not relevant to today's classrooms or like learning experiences. So I think that imposter syndrome is something that When you're used to seeing most teacher educators are white women. So when you're used to seeing that, and then you bring someone in like myself, I always have imposter syndrome because I don't know why these folks are going to see me as the expert. But I do know one thing well, and that's the kids in my school and in my environment. And so I can speak to that. You know, I can't be an expert in everything of all things, but I can be an expert about what's going on in my particular context.
Julia, something that you said earlier, you were talking about, you used the word centered. I just want to bring that back into the conversation. I think it's important for a lot of us to realize that one of the reasons we feel so uncomfortable being in the center and speaking or sharing our stories is because we've been marginalized for so long. Our voices have been devalued. You know, we've been unseen, we've been unheard. So, you know, there's that saying, there's a quote, God grant me the confidence of an average white man. You know, I'm like, sometimes I see young male white teachers do stuff and say stuff, and I look at them like, you talking like you're the chancellor. You're talking like you run the whole national educational system. And how long have you been teaching? It's their first month. I've been teaching 20 years and I wouldn't talk with that confidence. So it's interesting how centering can create confidence. And we do have to just wear the robe and just step into that space and own it.
Well, in stand-up, Yumi Kim, I was just gonna say that it's like fake it till you make it sometimes.
Well, you know, it's funny, just going back to what Tori was saying, I think I am so used to not being centered. I am so used to being the sidekick or, you know, the person that's only depicted sometimes, that when I first wrote this story, I did what a lot of people do. And whenever there was like a Korean word, I would like kind of explain what it means right away, you know, and that was just what because I was so aware of my, you know, non-Korean readers, and they're not going to know what this word means and they're going to feel uncomfortable. And it wasn't until I saw this really amazing panel of other authors, and they were having this whole discussion on whether to italicize, whether not to italicize. And it was such a like impactful conversation because this story is told through Yumi's point of view. Yumi is a bilingual person. This is how she thinks. When she hears a word, when she hears something, she doesn't explain it to herself. You know what I mean? And this story is completely told in her perspective. And I want you, reader, to come along on her journey. And some of these words, you know, you're not going to understand right away. Some of them you could put together by context. Some of them you can honestly just Google if you're really all that curious. But it was like this power that I didn't even know that I could have, which white people never think about. English speaking people, they just write their stories and they never have to contextualize or accommodate, you know, to all the other people. And I think that's something that we're just so used to doing. And when I finally went back and decided not to italicize, not to explain every little word, and I want you to just go on my journey, just come with me. Come with me. You're going to meet people in my community. You're going to see things through her eyes. You're going to have conflicts that you maybe didn't understand fully. And I just want you to join me in my story. And I think that was a huge lesson as a creator, as a person of color, just claiming that space that I didn't even know I was allowed to have.
That's a great quotable quote right there. Go ahead, Candace.
So I'm thinking about sort of piggybacking off of what Jessica just said. I'm thinking about how when I was in the classroom, I worked with young people on personal narratives. So all of my classes would usually be either poetry that was centered on identity, or we're doing like creative nonfiction where they're doing personal essays and things like that. And one of the biggest hurdles was that they were so used to being taught to write in someone else's vernacular for so long that they didn't realize how easy it would be to tell their own story if they would allow themselves to tell it in their own way of speaking. And that is something that like is my favorite part about writing YA, is writing dialogue and writing it exactly how young people speak, and not thinking about the others, right? So like if I'm writing about a first generation Black girl who's in high school, and all her life she has been othered. In this book, she is not othered, and anybody else is going to have to just figure it out. And something that I I was able to notice in my students was that they just being taught like grammar, punctuation, and all of that kind of stuff around a set of rules that is completely different from how you speak when you're at home just really did a number on them. And so it became really, really, really important for me to start bringing in books that centered their way of speaking, their way of life, their cultures, without worrying so much about what I've been told was the classics or what is considered like top tier writing or whatever, what have you. And just kind of like teaching storytelling as something that can be done well using the language that you have. Like good storytelling is not huge words and knowing all of these like English writing rules. It's more so knowing how to manipulate timing and to use certain details to, you know what I mean, to liven up a story. And so I really just, I guess what I'm rambling sort of about is that I keep my eye on the audience, the young people that I am writing for. Like when I'm writing and when I'm teaching, like same thing with my books and my classroom. Like if I'm keeping my eye on my students and what is useful to them, an adult can come in the classroom and they're gonna have to wait. Or, you know what I mean? Or like if, I'm writing my own story, the Everybody Looking, I didn't center, like what everybody else around this main character might have been feeling or going through. I was centering someone who normally just did not know what her own voice sounded like outside of what she had been taught. It's just so thick. Like my memory about my students in my classroom is just like that their own way of speaking had been policed so much that they didn't even realize like some of the best stories out there are written like you. Like it's just amazing. I can't believe still in the 2020s and the 2018, 2015, all of that, like kids are still feeling like they have to speak a certain way in order to be a good storyteller.
And that they have to write a certain way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because so many of our tools for assessment, and there's this false belief that they have to have mastery of certain texts in order to know how to write well, mm-hmm. or to read well. So if you can read, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales in 12th grade, then, for the longest time, Brit Lit was a standard for 12th grade. Everybody had to take Brit Lit. And then you had to read Canterbury Tales and Beowulf. And if you can do that, then you're considered accomplished, which is like so wild, right? Come on, and I mean, we can talk more about that later. Tori, I saw that you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I think about that movie Dumbo. I think about elephants, right? There's this theory. I've never seen it put into practice, but I think a lot of us know about it. What's one of the ways that you get an elephant to stay tied to a little rope, to a little peg that it could easily just yank out of the ground, right? How do you do it? Well, what you do is you get that elephant when it's a baby and it doesn't have the strength to yank that cord, right? And it struggles and it struggles, and then it grows into a massive elephant and it stops trying. It could easily do it. But then something interesting happens. The baby elephants see the mama and the papa elephants, and they're not trying, so the baby elephants don't try. This is analogous to something that happens in our world. We as adults of color are told that we can't code switch, that we have, in order to be acceptable, we gotta fit into the norms of whiteness. This happened in my school. I remember going into the main office, and I'm in the main office making copies, and a bunch of kids come in, and one of the kids goes, "Hey, yo, Mr. T, what's good?" And I'm like, "Yo, just chilling, what you doing?" And he's like, "I'm not doing nothing, what you getting into?" I'm like, "Nothing, but yo, let's get up later." They leave. As soon as they leave, the white woman secretary turns to me and says, "Do you speak like that to the kids all the time?" And I said, wait, what? I didn't even realize that I had spoken in another language, the language of kids speak. I was like, so I was kind of stunned, but I didn't realize something. There was a little kid who was still there watching me, watching for my reaction. And now I'm the big elephant. Am I gonna stay chained to the little thing and have to fit, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Or do I break free? So I just I did this really for him. I flipped it and I told her, I was just like, of course I speak like that to kids. You don't know how to speak like that to kids? Those kids come see me during lunch. They see me before school. They see me after school. They have a rapport with me that they don't have with any other teacher. Mm-hmm. So maybe if you know how to speak like that with them, then you will get a responsiveness like I get. And I think that goes back to what makes our writing so precious. We are writing in an unapologetically kids speak way where kids are like, yeah, they don't want to put our books down. They go from, oh, do I have to read what Simran wrote? Do I have to read what Candace wrote? Do I have to read what Jessica wrote? So, yo, I get to read what Simran wrote. Yo, look at this book that Candace wrote. Yo, Jessica wrote this. Look at this. In the hair salon, what happens? You get what I'm saying? So I think that there's a power in us and owning us. And, you know, you see in the world, people are trying to commodify us.
But also these texts, these books that you've written, I hope that they will be considered canonical works down the road because people have read them and loved them over and over, but the canon needs to keep evolving with the people. That's what, you know, we had some questions in the Q&A and I'll just go ahead and address this, but I co-founded a conversation, a grassroots, you know, group initiative, if you want to call it, Disrupt Text, with 3 other educators of color, Lorena Herman, Trisha Abarvia, and Dr. Kim Parker. And the reason that we got the conversation started was because we wanted to disrupt people's ideas of what belonged in what was considered canon, which are the books that always get bought, the books that always get taught. And I think that if we could get to a place where people were able to just see, you don't need to teach Charlotte's Web. You can definitely take, you know, this book instead, and you might have some students actually seeing themselves reflected or learning about students who are in their world, humanizing along the way as an act of resistance, but also an act of empowerment. Then, you know, you don't need to keep teaching things like Charlotte's Web or Little House on the Prairie, just because those books have been embedded in the collective consciousness as books that are of worth, when we know that there are issues, serious issues with a lot of the books that people claim to be, you know, so they claim that are so precious. I put a bunch of questions into the chat for y'all because they've been coming through and I've been trying to keep an eye on that at the same time. One that I do think that folks are curious about is what is it was for Candace, and I put it, a teaching artist.
What is a teaching artist? Mm-hmm. Okay, a teaching artist is like a contracted artist who comes into the school or pushes into a class to teach a specific, either you're teaching an art form or you're amplifying what the teacher is working on using an art form that you specialize in. And so I got to create my own schedule. I chose what schools I worked at. And I was more so one-off, like, you know, 1 to 3 classes in a given school and then go to another school and do the same thing. And what you get to teach as a teaching artist really varies based on what school you're working at, what age group, and then also how long you've been doing it. So towards the end of my time teaching, I got to create my own class entirely. But I chose teaching artistry because there's a lot of freedom as far as like what you get to do in your class and what you have time for when it comes to connecting with kids.
I think that that's really important for our students of color specifically, to see artists that look like them, that are actually like employed and, you know, doing the work of creating and adding to the world. Because I had someone come up to me not too long ago and say, you mean you actually get paid money for being an author? I thought you just got those stickers, you know, the ones that go on the front. She just thought that that was like that was what they got, and like a roll of those stickers. And I'm like, no, that's not exactly how it works. But it was exciting because then she thought, well, I want to try being a poet then. And then we were talking about, you know, different types of poetry and what would need to happen in order for you to go out there and make your way in the world. So, you know, I do think that that's real for a lot of our students, is not only overcoming the insecurity or disbelief piece, but just not knowing that artists are out there in the world making magic and making it happen and having careers.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, that adds to the collective, you know, development of our racial consciousness, as, you know, they're folks that look like us. There are a couple more questions. I'm trying to scroll through to see what folks want to know about. Feel free to keep them coming if people want to drop questions into the Q&A. They're kind of getting filtered through for us. What are some contemporary children's YA authors that inspire you?
I have one that's on the top of, or the tip of my tongue. There's two. So you said contemporary YA. Last year I read Akweke Emezi's Pet, and I also read The Stars and the Blackness Between Them by Junauda Petrus. And they inspire me because they're so free. I'm used to people thinking that because I write for kids or I write for teenagers, that my book is like, like, you know, it's academic and it's to teach a certain lesson, and they don't realize that like YA can be just as raw and racy as adult fiction. Like lots of these, all these grades, I've seen all kinds of things in these, and I recommend Pet and The Stars and the Blackness Between Them because they illustrate young people in these very interesting lights that has nothing to do with like what a teacher would want them to be like, or what a teacher would want them to do. Like I've read lots of books where it's just, yeah, it just feels like the book was written to tell something to a kid and not speak with, but to talk down to or talk at or to teach them something. And I think those two books honor like what a child's own world and own feelings, and it has nothing to do with the adults.
I feel like I could give or name 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 great YA contemporary authors, or I could point someone to The Vault and let them get much more value. And I'd rather do that. There are 2 books that I would recommend you look at, because if you look at these books are overflowing with YA voices. And then you could pick that author or that creator, and then you could just look at their body of work, and whatever syncs up with you, syncs up with you. So I have to tip my hat to Cheryl Willis Hudson and also Wade Hudson. They wrote, they curated the anthology called The Talk. It is a must-have. It should be a holy book in every library everywhere around the world, The Talk. So they've curated middle grade to YA authors who you'll fall in love with. And then also I had hat tip to the Hudsons. Their original, what created The Talk was We Rise, We Resist, We Raise Our Voices. So if you can get those 2 anthologies, then you will have 2 different bank vaults that you can walk into and get a great amount of YA names.
I feel like we are getting to the end of our time together, and I don't want to end it because there are more questions that are phenomenal in the chat. And like someone's asking what books would pair well with Fauja Singh Keeps Going. And somebody else was asking if Jessica knew about Disrupt Text and if you had any comments on that. They directed it to you. I don't know if you do. Okay. So Simran, if you want to type in the chat anything that you would pair with Fauja Singh Keeps Going, we could do that. But I think I need to make sure that I respect folks' time and wrap up as close to time as I can. It's been an honor to talk with you all today, though, and I'm definitely planning on adding your books to my home library in addition to the library at school, so just know that. And though I work with secondary students primarily, it's totally appropriate for me to buy all of these and have class sets and encourage people to teach them. So I know, Candice, you have an educator guide. Jessica, I know you have one as well, because Sarah Park Dallin is in my book club.
Awesome.
So, and then Tori, I wrote the one for yours.
Yeah. What's up? Thank you.
And Simran, do you have one that I could recommend for people?
I do, yeah. It's also on the Penguin Classroom website.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So the educator guides really help to get these past the wall of administration that wants you to prove that the book has curricular value. So if anybody needs to do that, get the educator guides, and those should help you make your case. And I think we can go to our book list slides if we want to. If any of the folks behind the scenes want to roll those. There is an anti-racist reading for all ages resource, a curated book list that I believe was written by my dear friend, sister, homie, who also wrote This Book is Anti-Racist, Tiffany Jewell. She put together this collection of these books, anti-racist reading for all ages. And I just want to make it clear that just having these books in your collection doesn't make you anti-racist. It's the continual work of disrupting the thought processes, actions, behaviors, all of the things that keep racism in place, and then also centering the work of creators of color. Those are anti-racist actions, but there's so much more that we could say about that. I just wanted to make that distinction. And then we can get the discussion guides or the educator guides, as we mentioned. You can get those from the Penguin Classroom site. And I think that might be it. Might be one more. Yeah, I think that's it. So my sunlight is going. I don't know what's up with that, but I just became very black, which is fine. Love it. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so glad that we got to hang out, and I look forward to sharing your books with folks. And I wish you all a great, nice, easy coast to the weekend.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Julia, and a huge thank you to all of our wonderful panelists. And just a note to all of everybody attending this webinar, if you are somebody who asked a question and we didn't have a chance to get to yours, all of these questions will be passed along to our panelists, and they'll have a chance to respond behind the scenes. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, title list, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit www.booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones, like the ones you see here. If you haven't already, be sure to check out Booklist Reader, where Booklist contributors post daily about all things books and library land. And if you're not yet a subscriber, you can pair the page-by-page reading experience of print with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com and lock in print, online, and digital and archive access by taking advantage of the special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and one more huge thank you to our sponsor, Penguin Young Readers. This concludes today's webinar.